Before we begin, and we will begin, I need 30 seconds. If you're new here, subscribe, not at the end, now, because the kind of stories told on this channel are not the kind you stumble into twice. Hit the button. I'll wait. Now tell me something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. City, country, time zone, whatever you're comfortable sharing. Every time one of these stories goes live, the comment section turns into a map of the world. Someone watching from Nairobi at midnight, someone in Toronto on a lunch break, someone in Southeast Asia at 6 a.m. with coffee and nowhere to be. That map matters. Add your name to it. And Sharon, yes, you've watched every single story, every level, every late upload. This one is for you. Now, thank you to my subscriber. Love you. Level 1 the jump. You sign nothing. There is no form. One day you are a 20-year-old from Ohio who has never left the county, and the next you are standing in a hangar in England with a parachute strapped to your back that weighs more than your kid sister. They call you a paratrooper now. You are not sure you believe them. June 5th, 1944, 2,300 hours. They walk you to the plane in the dark. AC 47, engine roaring before you even climb in. You sit on a metal bench with 11 other men and your knees touch the knees of the man across from you. Nobody talks. The plane smells like engine grease and vomit and wet wool. Someone already got sick and it wasn't from the turbulence. You understand. You feel it too. The crew chief slides the door shut. You feel the runway beneath you, then nothing, just the black Atlantic air and the drone of 100 other planes flying in formation around you, invisible in the dark. They told you the plan in a briefing room with a sand table model of Normandy. Drop zones marked in red. Assembly points marked in blue. Objectives circled in grease pencil. Take the battery. Hold the road. Link up by 0400. The plan made sense in the briefing room. The flak starts 20 minutes out. You see it through the small oval window. Orange bursts opening in the sky like flowers, and the plane bucks hard left and someone's helmet cracks against the fuselage and the pilot does not slow down, does not turn back, does not say a word. The red light comes on. A single bulb the color of a dying coal, mounted above the door. The jump master stands up. He does not look afraid. You decide to look at him instead of the window. Stand up. Hook up. You stand. You hook your static line to the cable above your head. 80 pounds of gear pulls at your shoulders, your hips, your knees. The man behind you puts his hand on your back. Not to push, just to say, I'm here. We're doing this. The door opens. The sound is catastrophic, wind and engine and the far-off percussion of a coastline that is actively exploding. Cold air hits your face like a fist. Below you, through the smoke and the dark, is France. It is on fire. The green light comes on. You are not brave. You are not ready. You are not the soldier they made you out to be in the posters back home. You jump anyway. Level 2, the flooded marshes. You don't land. You crash. The chute collapses the moment your boots hit water and the weight of your gear does the rest, 80 pounds driving you straight down into a flooded field that is exactly 2 feet deep and feels like drowning anyway. Your face goes under. The harness tightens across your chest like a fist closing. The silk billows out behind you in the dark water, pulling, dragging, trying to roll you onto your back and hold you there. You find your knife. You don't remember reaching for it. You cut the left strap, then the right. The chute releases and you lurch upright, gasping, standing in black water up to your thighs, alone in a Norman marsh at midnight with no idea where you are. They briefed you on this. Wooden stakes driven into every open field, strung with wire, some of them mined. You can see the silhouettes of them now, dark shapes jutting out of the water at angles, like a dead orchard. You move carefully. Every step is a guess. The water is cold enough to make your legs feel wooden and somewhere ahead of you, maybe 30 meters, maybe 300, a machine gun is firing at something. Not at you. Not yet. You reach into your breast pocket, pull out the small tin clicker. 1 click, pause, 2 clicks back. That's the signal. That's how you find your people in the dark. You click once. Silence. Water. Distant artillery. You click again. From somewhere to your left, barely audible over the sound of the war beginning without you, 2 clicks back. You are not alone. Level 3, the scattered few. His name is Sergeant Kowalski and he is from Pittsburgh and that is all he tells you. The private beside him, a kid named Tully, barely 17 by the look of him, is shaking so hard his gear rattles. Different regiment, different drop zone. Neither of them knows where they are any more than you do. The 3 of you crouch in the reeds at the field's edge and Kowalski spreads the map across his knee. He has a red filtered flashlight. He studies the map for a long time. Then he folds it up and puts it back in his pocket. We're nowhere on this, he says quietly. That is when you understand. Not as an idea, but as a physical fact that settles into your chest like cold water. The plan, the sand table, the grease pencil circles, the 0400 link up, it's gone. The scattered planes, the flak, the wind. Everyone is lost. You are not the exception. You are the rule. Kowalski doesn't waste time grieving it. He points west. You move. The sunken lane appears out of the dark like a cut in the earth, hedgerows rising on both sides, the path worn down 6 feet below the fields by 1,000 years of Norman farmers. Good cover. Bad sight lines. You hear them before you see them. Boot steps. The soft clink of a rifle sling. German. Kowalski doesn't speak. He holds up a fist and you all stop breathing. 4 of them. Maybe 5. Moving slow. Moving careful. Same as you. What happens next takes 11 seconds. You know because you count them afterward, sitting in the dark with blood on your hands that isn't yours. 11 seconds of silence and violence and then nothing. You keep moving west. Level 4, the battery assault. The village has no name on Kowalski's map. It doesn't need one. What it has is a stone wall running along its southern edge, a church steeple with a weather vane shaped like a rooster, and Germans. You can see the outline of the battery beyond the rooftops, the long barrels of the guns angled toward the coast, toward the water, toward the fleet that is supposed to be landing right now if any part of this day is still going according to plan. By dawn those guns could reach the beach. Kowalski adds that fact to the situation the same way he adds everything else, without expression, without drama. He looks at you. He looks at Tully. He looks back at the wall. There are 5 of you now. 2 more paratroopers materialized from a ditch 20 minutes back. A medic named Resnick and a demolitions man whose name you never catch. It doesn't matter. What matters is the wall, and what's beyond it. You are halfway across the open ground when the milligram 42 opens up. Nothing prepares you for the sound. They called it Hitler's buzzsaw in the briefings and you nodded like you understood, but you did not understand. It is not a machine gun the way you know machine guns. It fires 1,200 rounds a minute and the sound it makes is a single sustained tear, like the air itself is being ripped open along a seam. It is not loud so much as it is everywhere, filling the space inside your skull, and the dirt jumping up around your boots is so close and so fast it looks like rain. You don't decide to run for the trench. Your body decides for you. You go in hard and low and the German soldier at the near end doesn't have time to swing his rifle around. What happens is fast and ugly and you do not look at his face afterward. You move down the trench. Resnick on your left. Kowalski calling positions from behind. A grenade. For seconds. You count them now without thinking. The marsh taught you that. You throw it around the corner and press flat against the earthen wall and the concussion rolls through your chest like a closed fist. Then you move through the smoke. There is no fear anymore. That is the part nobody tells you about. The fear doesn't disappear, it converts. It becomes something narrow and functional and cold, a tunnel with one direction and no exits. You are not brave. You are simply no longer capable of anything except moving forward and clearing what is in front of you. Tully takes the last position with his bayonet. His hands are shaking again afterward, but in the moment they were not. None of yours were either. Level 5, the edge of the village. The crossroad is just 2 dirt lanes meeting at a stone crucifix that someone planted here 100 years ago for reasons that had nothing to do with war. You set up on it anyway. Kowalski puts you behind a low wall on the eastern approach, Resnick and the demolitions man on the north, Tully covering the lane that runs back through the village. The battery is silent now. Whatever is left of it is not pointing at the beach anymore. The counterattack comes at first light. You hear the half-track before you see it, the grinding, mechanical patience of it moving up the road in the grey pre-dawn, infantry following behind in the shadows. Kowalski lets them get close, closer than feels survivable. Then he fires and the crossroad becomes a very small, very loud world with no room in it for anything except the next 3 seconds. You hold. You don't know how. You hold. It is Tully who sees the fleet first. He says nothing, just grabs your arm and points east, toward the coast, toward the water that is just visible now between 2 farm buildings as the sky begins to pale. You look and you stop firing for a full 2 seconds because what you see doesn't seem real. Ships. Not a few ships. Not a convoy. Thousands of them, stretching to the horizon in both directions. So many that the channel looks like it has grown a city overnight. Destroyers, transports, landing craft, the whole impossible machinery of it sitting out there on the grey water, quiet and enormous and inevitable. You feel something. Not hope exactly. Something grimmer than hope. The sense that this is actually happening. That it is too large now to be stopped by anything as small as you. You go back to firing. Resnick is hit 20 minutes later. Clean and fast. One moment he is beside you and the next Kowalski is pulling you away from him and telling you to move, and his voice has the particular flatness of a man who has done this before and hates that he has. There is no service. No moment of stillness. The war does not pause for Resnick. You move back to the wall. You reload. You keep his sector covered because someone has to and he no longer can. That is all the morning allows. Level 6, the longest day ends. It happens all at once. The way a door closing happens, one moment you are moving and the next you are not. Your back finds the stone wall and you simply stop. Your legs give their notice without consulting you. The rifle is still in your hands but you couldn't say when you last fired it. The crossroad is quiet. The village is quiet. Somewhere to the north there is still artillery, the deep tidal percussion of the naval guns working the interior, but it is far enough away now that your brain has filed it under background and moved on. You sit. The sun is low and amber and it lights the dust still hanging over the lane in a way that would be beautiful under any other set of circumstances. The cigarette is in your breast pocket behind the cricket clicker and it is damp from the marsh and slightly bent and it is the finest thing you have ever held in your life. Your hands shake getting the lighter open. Not from fear. The fear finished its work hours ago and left quietly without saying goodbye. This is just the body settling its accounts, the adrenaline that kept you upright and functional and alive draining away like water through sand, leaving behind something that isn't quite pain and isn't quite peace but lives somewhere in the cold geography between them. You light the cigarette on the third try. Kowalski sits down beside you. He doesn't speak. Tully is asleep against the wall 10 feet away, helmet tipped over his face. Gear still on, out before he even made the decision to rest. The demolitions man whose name you never caught is somewhere in the village doing something useful probably. You don't have the energy to find out. You think about Resnick for a moment, then you put it somewhere else. There is a place you have discovered today, a back room in your mind with a heavy door, and that is where it goes for now. You understand instinctively that the door will not hold forever, but it will hold tonight. June 6th, 1944 is over. You are alive. That is the whole of what you have to show for it. The simple, enormous, unremarkable fact of your own continued existence. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows and the broken villages and the bodies cooling in the Norman fields, the war for Europe is just finding its footing. The Germans are regrouping. The generals are drawing new lines on new maps. There are hundreds of days like this one still waiting in the calendar ahead, each of them with their own crossroads, their own Resnicks, their own trenches to clear in the dark. You take a long pull on the damp cigarette. You made it through the first one. That will have to be enough.